Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Reducing Improper Payments with Automation, Robotics, and AI, sponsored by Automation Anywhere on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today, Keith Nelson, the Global Head of Public Sector for Automation Anywhere, Tim Persons, the Chief Scientist at the Government Accountability Office, John Felstead, the Chief of Enterprise Integration and Technology Services at the Defense Logistics Agency, and Adam Goldberg, the Executive Architect at the Office of Financial Innovation and Transformation at the Bureau of Fiscal Service for the Treasury Department. We ended last segment talking about really some of the reasons why RPA is moving forward, right? It's the back office, it's starting to get into the citizen services side. But one of the big things that I think that we can't overlook and we should go back to is when we look back at the 25, 30 years of technology in government, and there's a lot of, if you will, broken promises, lots of mismanaged efforts, lots of things that came up that said, "Oh, this is the next best thing," and then never kind of fulfilled its expectations. So, Keith, jump in a little bit and talk a little bit about why RPA. Do you think now is the right time, and why it's taking off?
Yeah. Well, our company started in the commercial sector and has recently moved strongly into the federal public sector space. But this is not necessarily an emerging technology especially when you're talking to commercial enterprises that have really deployed RPA and intelligent automation in a great way. So there's a lot of lessons learned, and there's actually a lot of practical software code that can be grabbed and slightly tweaked. So you're not necessarily starting from word go. You actually can take some code that's already been developed for a very similar use case and put it into government processes. I mean, government has a lot of the same processes that commercial enterprises face, and we know because we have lots of government officials that go to private sector and back. And they adapt some of those best practices. So that's a great way that's why this has kind of been quick to take off. There's not necessarily a lot of programming done. If you really start with some basic automation processes, you can get it going very quickly. Some of the software is built so that actual business users who know where their daily log jams occur, they can actually program their own bots and then get it tested and looked at by IT. But if they program their own bots to say, I want to cut some of these steps out of my daily headache and prepare a certain spreadsheet to hand off to the next person, they can do that. It's not that hard to code. So those are some of the reasons why this is taking off.
So two things I just want to follow up with you on. The first is I've heard examples in the government where the person who used to be doing this task, whatever the redundant transactional task is, now they're coding. They've been kind of brought into it and say, hey, we put them through a training session and now they're helping others with RPA. So it's a fascinating piece. And the second thing is, you talk about the code that's out there. Are we talking open source, or are we talking proprietary, or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both. I mean, we've put together a kind of an industrial bot store where we have over 500 bots that have been built by some Automation employees, Automation Anywhere employees, but some customers that have put it up there. Some don't want to, they consider it proprietary information. But certainly when you're talking about government, there's a sharing environment. People join government because they want to share and they want to learn from each other. By making that available for, even if it's just specific to a single department because of the network security issues, that's fine. It helps in a couple of things. It helps you stop redundant bot building,
right?
Because you're almost guaranteed to have two people in two corners of a department doing the same thing, and you don't want to waste that time. So it can help you kind of control that. And secondly, it's really, that's the key to scaling, is to actually have what we call citizen developers or business user developers. If they have to wait for IT to get back to them and say, oh, let me understand your requirements, let me try to figure out what your process is. I don't really know your job, so I got to learn their process. That's a very lengthy setup, and it's not ideal for scaling. So those are two of the areas I'd talk about.
Important points. Adam, jump in a little bit as well, because one of the things that You guys started a couple years ago now, and you're seeing the evolution of bots and the impact. Were you surprised by how quickly it got picked up throughout the Bureau of Fiscal Service?
I think yes and no.
Yes and no.
I think surprised that when we approached the staff about creating the bots, that they were very open to this. We talk about the fear of, is this bot going to take over my job? But the way it was presented is this is really going to give you the opportunity to do more analytical work than what you'd be doing if you continue to work on this repetitive process. So that was a bit surprising. I think just given the desire for cost savings these days, I would say no, it wasn't that surprising, because I think people were looking for an ROI that could be achieved much sooner, and I think that possibility exists here and allows other people to do different functions than they were doing previously.
And Tim, let me bring you back into the conversation as well. From GAO's perspective, as you are looking at using this type of technology, it's nice to kind of have that excitement over the bots, but there's things that have to happen to make the bots work, and we'll get to data in a second, but it's also the business process change. I think you guys are trying to see some of that.
Yes, exactly right. This is largely a change management conversation. We've seen this before in different variants, and so we know we can come through it. The key issue is how quickly we can adapt to the change and really leverage the change. It's not so much that we have to fight it, but we should sort of ride it, using the sort of the wave analogy. If we can leverage it, I think there's a lot of opportunity on that. That's part why I talk about people, process, data, technology. We'll get to the data. But I think what we've often seen is where the converse happens. Folks start with the technology and then try and drive that into things, and then people are at the very end and are left out, and that's where you have cultural friction. You have folks saying, look, you're trying to outsource me or replace me and so on. I think that's the wrong approach. I think the success that we've seen, like in what Adam's been doing, what's going on at DLA, is largely because you can start out with sort of lower hanging fruit. You can start out with the people and say, look, let me just understand your pain points. I engage with a lot of civil servants, and I can invariably think of all the things that they say, well, my life would be better with XYZ kind of change. And oftentimes those things come in part complaint and part problem statement. So part of the strategy that we're following just for our own internal methods, but we would endorse in terms of innovation process overall, is just really, what is the problem? How do we really define that? And how can we leverage the people who are going to be the ones that most understand it? Keith mentioned already, some people, if you're coding already on your shop, then you're starting to help solve that problem, because the problem owner is also being part of the solution. They could be augmented by the quants or the data types, the computer engineers, those sort of folks. And there's a lot of opportunity, but you walk into it from that direction. You do focus on the process and technology, but I think it has yielded large results, and largely because of this, Jason, as you were saying, this convergence of all these technologies, the massive amount of bandwidth we have now that's largely or practically for free, the cloud storage, the devices we have in the palm of our hand, and now you throw in what's coming and emerging in 5G, and now you're just talking about Internet of Things and everything else. So I think it's not if, but how we walk this journey together, and I think there's a lot of opportunity.
John, I want to ask you to comment on something that Tim had mentioned. We've heard a couple times the low-hanging fruit conversation come up. You seem to have experienced people who want to eat the apple in one bite, right? They want to do too much. Talk a little bit about your philosophy and how you kind of are encouraging them to just take a half a step back or a full step back.
Correct. So I belong to a lot of the RPA government consortiums, working groups, and a lot of the complaints are how difficult it is for some agencies just to get the program started. So at DLA, I was fortunate. We have, if you can't get your senior leadership involved in buying into this, then it's much more of a struggle. For me, it was the director, vice director, CIO. They embrace the innovation. They're pushing this forward. But if, let's say, and I work in the IT department. Let's say you work in the finance department. You see the benefits of running RPA, but your IT department has so many priorities that it's not on their hit list, right? And they're not getting pressure from above to make it a priority. So my recommendation is that you start out on a thick client, a laptop, you get the development software on there, you run it, and you go after just the low-hanging fruit, which is just the simplest things. Just start out with some, small things, build up your portfolio of processes, and then you could start going around and showing other people. And when they can actually see it in action versus just talking about it. So we actually do these videos of the bots running, and we bring those out to those work groups so that people can see the way they work. And we also, we were talking about the sharing of the coding
code,
and everything else. So we have technical design documents as part of all the paperwork and governance that we have. And in there it breaks down every step that automation that bot kicked off is running. We share that with other DoD agencies or federal agencies because, again, we are not the commercial world. We're not competitive. We're not trying to outdo each other. We are trying to help each other, so we can reuse a lot of that code. I just want to put that out there.
Are you finding people are reusing your code?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get so many thank yous, and we put it out there like, absolutely, you need help, you need this. We'll put it in, not just, I mean, we had the Canadian government reaching out to us, telling us, how do we get this started? And I told them the same thing. Start off low-hanging fruit. Don't try to build, I mean, like we're a year in, we're way advanced into this at this point. But if you can, all you can do is a laptop, get the software on it, and you have somebody just running these automations and kicking them off and developing them from there, that just gets you started. Now you got something to show the CIO or some of your senior management to get the buy-in. Look what this has done. Look what it saved me.
Tim.
And I just wanted to jump in and build on something John said, and it's come up in the other comments from Adam and Keith, but I think this idea of taking some things offline, so you're not sort of getting in the way of the mission, you're trying to create the space to experiment. You need to have the ability to have useful failure, as it were, to try some things out. If it blows up, it's a small risk on that, but it could have huge upsides if you're able to take it off so that you're not in the undesirable position of over-promising, under-delivering, a tech-centered, usually large check, focus, being spent, and focus coming in and telling operators how to do their things. I think the way the important narrative you're hearing is how there's sort of a symbiosis between the data, the quant, those sort of people with the mission operators to understand their problem, take it offline, try some things, and then try and insert it in a way that is done with them. And that's, I think, a key cultural aspect.
Keith, are you seeing that from your government clients, that they want to do the big things or the little things? Are they trying to do the proof of concepts and then moving it into production?
A lot of times, the successful formula, I think we've said, is a little bit of a proof of concept and show that and make the proof point and then build from there. This is just, it's an easier technology. You don't have to go through a lengthy, cumbersome requirements process. I mean, how many bots do you think DLA will wind up with? You don't know. At the end of the line. So he didn't say, well, we got to figure out every process that needs to be automated, and this is how many bots we need to buy, and this is how many licenses. No, he just said, let's get enough to work with, to become comfortable, to make it part of our infrastructure. You don't have to gut out any of even the old legacy systems that may not be really working that well for you. RPA can help them execute a lot better. In the interim, some people are doing that as a way to bridge that gap before they bring in a brand new ERP or something significant like that. This is a lot easier, a lot shorter term exercise than that.
So John, I got to ask, how many bots you're going to end up with?
I think, so our goal for the first year was 50 automations, right? So our terminology, bots run the automation.
Right.
So automation or use cases, 50 was our goal for the first year. We got 53. Our goal for the next year is 100. But I still
100
think
more or 100 total?
100 additional.
Okay.
So again, I said with those 53, we projected to give the equivalent contribution of 80 FTEs. So you can imagine with 100, depending on what those processes do, it could be twice that. There's no way of telling. But even with that, I still think we're scratching the surface of all the processes that are running. Another important point to point out here is that when people go to do this, you got to educate them on it doesn't create a process. It doesn't fix a broken process. You've got to have a process. So if you start looking at areas like that, it's just going to slow you down too. Go for where there's already a process, it's repetitive, and you'll be much better off and move much faster.
Adam, jump in.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to add is that I think today in our maturity level with bots, we're kind of at the very early stages. When I started, I mentioned that we estimated somewhere between 500 million and 750 million savings at full implementation. Going from 60 to 100 bots, there's going to need to be a huge jump in activity. So one of the things that we are starting to do is maybe move away from what I might call more of a transactional bot view to an actual end-to-end business process view, and begin to look at that end-to-end process, like procure to pay or record to report, and analyze that from an end-to-end standpoint. see where bots may be a solution, see where the elimination of actually doing an activity might be a solution, or look at some other type of automation that may be a higher and better use than the RPA bot. And that's really going to be able to take us to the larger savings in the long term.
And that's an interesting concept when you say move from transactional to end-to-end, or you have to map it out. Is that the process you have to go through to say, how do we start it from A and go to Z?
Well, yeah, it's part. So we've been using a fancier term. It used to be process map. Now it's journey map.
Journey, of course.
And in the journey map, you're going to identify your pain points. And once you've identified those pain points, you need to make some decision as to how you want to treat that activity. It's unclear right now. John was mentioning you fill out a form when you want a bot created. You do the same for us. How that individual determined what they wanted to put on the form. What I'm suggesting is that if you kind of go through a journey mapping exercise, that would then feed what your request would be. And so again, it's unclear what's happening in advance of the form at the agencies. But if you look at the types of bots we're creating, my assumption is someone is saying, hey, this is a problem, it's repetitive, let's tackle this, but not doing it in the context of the larger business process it supports.
All right, very interesting. We didn't touch upon data. When we come back in the next segment, we're going to jump into the data side of this. First, we're going to take a break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Reducing Improper Payments with Automation, Robotics, and AI, sponsored by Automation Anywhere on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.